You build a fortress to keep your treasures safe. You raise the walls high. You set the guards. You hide the keys in the most secret of places. But you never, ever think the threat will come from within your own house. I was that foolish. I built my fortress well. The circle saw to that. But I left the door unlocked for my family. I trusted them with the secret of the lock itself. And that was my greatest error. The reading of the will was the beginning of the end. I was there, in the oak-panelled lawyer's office I'd designed myself, watching from the portrait of a long-dead Pitt that hung behind Arthur Fink's desk. The air smelled of lemon polish and old paper, a smell I'd always loved. Now it smelled of an ending. Arthur, my old friend, his hands trembling slightly not with age, but with the gravity of his duty, read the words aloud. He got to the clause, the important one. Item 7, he read, his voice gaining strength, becoming ceremonial. All provisions herein, all disbursements of assets, properties, and holdings, are contingent upon the verification and blessing of the appointed keeper of the circle of the silent word. This verification must be conducted per the ancient rites of the circle, held in the designated sanctum, before the next full moon. Until such rites are completed, the entirety of the estate is held in a trust of silence, immutable and inviolate. The silence in the room was thicker than the Persian rug on the floor. It was my son-in-law, David, a man with the soul of an accountant and the ambition of a Caesar, who broke it first. What in the blazes does that mean? Arthur, ancient rites, sanctum. This is a will, not a fantasy novel. Arthur didn't look at him. He looked at my children. It means precisely what it says. The estate is locked. Alistair's wishes are clear. My daughter, Charlotte, always the most like me in temper, leaned forward, her eyes sharp. So, who is this keeper? Where do we find him? Let's get this done. Now. Arthur allowed himself a small, sad smile. You don't find the keeper. The keeper finds you. And I am he. The reaction was instantaneous. My son, Robert, burst out laughing, a harsh, incredulous sound. You, Arthur, for God's sake. We've known you since we were children. You used to bring us lollipops. You can't be serious. Just sign whatever paper you need to sign and let's be done with this theatrics. It is not theatrics, Robert, Arthur said, his voice dropping, becoming the voice of the keeper, not the family friend. It is law. A law older and more binding than any in the state's books. The rights will be observed. All the trust will remain in perpetuity, the assets eventually dispersing to the circle's charitable works. That's when the greed showed its teeth. I saw it. A flicker in David's eyes, a hardening in Charlotte's, a flush of anger on Robert's neck. My beloved wife, rest her soul, was spinning in her grave. She had never trusted David. This is absurd. David snapped, standing up. This clause is unenforceable. It's vague. It's based on the actions of some mythical society. Well, challenge it. Well, have this whole document thrown out of probate court. Arthur simply looked at him, and in that look, I saw the immense, unassailable patience of the circle. You are welcome to try, David, but you will not succeed. The circle has stood for centuries. It has faced challenges before. Its foundations are deeper than you can possibly imagine. They left Arthur's office in a fury of muttered plans and legal threats. But I stayed. I watched Arthur. He waited until the door was closed, until the sound of their angry footsteps had faded. Then he walked to the portrait of my ancestor and looked straight at me, at the painted eyes that were my own. I am sorry, old friend, he whispered to the empty room. They are as you feared they would be. The test has begun, and I fear they will fail. Oh, Arthur, you had no idea how spectacularly they would fail. That night, they gathered in my library, my sanctuary, the room I had filled with the wisdom of ages, the scent of leather and vanilla, the quiet hum of knowledge. They defiled it with their plotting. They stood around my great mahogany desk, not looking at the books, only at the problem I represented. It's a power play, David declared, pacing like a general, the old man's last laugh. He's making us jump through hoops for our own money. Well, I'm not jumping. Arthur is the key. We pressure him. We find his pressure points. Charlotte, swirling a glass of my best brandy, nodded. His wife is ill. The medical bills must be piling up. We offer to make it all go away. A generous consulting fee for his cooperation. Robert, already helping himself to the contents of my humidor, blew out a cloud of smoke. And if he doesn't cooperate, we dig. Everyone has secrets, especially men in secret societies. I felt a cold dread settle in my non-existent bones. They weren't just ignoring the code, they were planning to actively desecrate it, to attack a keeper. And then there was my granddaughter, Lily. Sweet, bright-eyed Lily, who was only 17. She was sitting in the window seat, hugging her knees, looking small and lost. Maybe we should just do what Grandpa asked, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It sounds important. He must have had a reason. David turned on her, his face a mask of condescending fury. The reason, Lily, is that he was a controlling old man who couldn't bear to let go. Hayes dead, and Hayes still trying to control us from the grave with this circle nonsense. Well, I won't be controlled. That was the moment. The line was crossed. The first rule of the circle is respect. They had shown none. The second is to never threaten a keeper. They were planning it. The response was swift. The lights went out, not just in the library, but in the entire house. The sudden blackness was absolute, a physical weight. The gentle hum of the electricity vanished, leaving a silence so deep I could hear the blood pounding in their ears. What the hell? Robert muttered. A breaker, David said, his voice tight. Don't panic. Everyone stay still. But it wasn't a breaker. From the darkness, a new light emerged. The great glass case that held my most prized possession of First Folio Shakespeare began to glow with a soft, internal luminescence. The case was locked, had been locked 4 years. Yet, the heavy glass door slowly swung open on silent hinges. The book inside did not move, but from its pages, a light bloomed, projecting words onto the opposite wall. They were not words from any of the Bard's plays. They were written in a sharp, angular script I knew all too well. The script of the circle. The first warning, heed the silence. The words hung in the air, burning into the wall, into their retinas. Then, the book snapped shut. The light died, and a moment later, the electricity returned with a soft click, the lamps flickering back to life. They stood frozen, staring at the now blank wall. The first folio case was closed and locked, exactly as it had been. David was the first to recover, his face pale. A trick, a projector. He must have rigged this theatrical nonsense before he died. But his voice lacked conviction. It was shaking. Lily was staring, her eyes wide with awe, not fear. It was Grandpa, she breathed. Hayes here. Don't be ridiculous. Lily, Charlotte snapped. But she drained her brandy glass in one gulp, her hand trembling. It's a trick, like David said. They tried to dismiss it. They tried to bury their fear under more planning, more brandy, more bluster. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The first crack in their arrogant certainty. The next day, they put their plan into action. Charlotte went to see Arthur's wife, Eleanor, at their modest home. She took a checkbook. She was all sympathy and concern, offering to pay for a top specialist, for a private nurse, for anything they needed. All she asked in return was for Arthur to see sense about the will. Eleanor Finch, a woman of quiet strength and deep loyalty, listened patiently. Then she took Charlotte's hand. Her touch was cold. Charlotte, dear, she said, her voice gentle but firm. You cannot buy what is not for sale. You cannot break what cannot be broken. Tell your husband to stop. This path only leads to sorrow. Charlotte left in a fury, insulted that her generosity had been refused. She reported back to David, who grew even angrier. Then we moved to phase 2, he said, his voice cold. We find his weakness. They hired a private investigator, a slimy little man to crow with a camera that was too big for his hands. He was to dig into Arthur's life, find any dirt, any secret, any leverage. Crow followed Arthur for 2 days. On the evening of the second day, he called David from his car, his voice jittery. This guy Hayes weird, Mr. Pitt, Crow said. He goes to this old, boarded up building downtown. The old Carnegie Library. Goes in a side door. I waited 4 hours. He never came out. I went to check the door. It was locked, rusted shut. There's no way he went in there. But I saw him. David, frustrated, told him to keep digging. The next morning, Crow was found in his office. He wasn't hurt, but every single file, every computer, every photograph in his office was gone. Not stolen, gone. The room was empty, save for Crow, who was sitting at his bare desk, staring at the wall. On the wall, written in what looked like ash, were the same words from my library. The second warning, turn back. Crow refused to speak to David ever again. He closed his business and left the city. The warnings were escalating. The circle was no longer being subtle, but my family, blinded by greed and now fueled by a superstitious fear they mistook for indignation, only became more desperate. David decided to take the most direct route. He went to the bank. He had papers. He had power of attorney. He had a smug sense of entitlement. He demanded access to my safe deposit box, the one mentioned in the will as holding the instrument of verification. The manager, a nervous man named Higgins, escorted him to the vault. The box was retrieved. David inserted the key with a triumphant flourish. He opened the door. Inside was not a diamond, nor a stack of bonds. There was a single, ordinary-looking river stone, smooth and grey, and beneath it, a folded piece of parchment. Bewildered, David unfolded the parchment. On it, in my handwriting, was a message. For David, who values only weight. This stone is from the foundation of the first Circle meeting house. It is worthless. It is priceless. It is the weight of tradition, which you have failed to carry. Your ambition is a hollow thing. David's face turned a mottled purple. He felt the sting of the insult, but he completely missed the message. He threw the stone down in disgust. It didn't clatter on the metal. It landed with a dull, final thud and didn't move, as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. He stormed out of the bank, humiliated. He couldn't see that the circle was speaking to him directly, personally, showing him the emptiness of his pursuit. That night, the true consequence began. It didn't target their bodies or their minds. It targeted the very thing they were fighting for, their wealth. David was on the phone with his broker, checking his portfolio. He was boasting about the windfall to come, about the deals he would make. In the middle of his sentence, the line went dead. Not just dead, silent. A silence so complete, it was like a void in his ear. He pulled the phone away, looked at the screen. It showed full service. He called back. The number was no longer in service. Puzzled, he turned to his computer. He tried to log into his brokerage account. Access denied. He tried his online banking. Access denied. A cold trickle of fear started down his spine. He called the 800 number for the bank. A recorded message greeted him. We're sorry. There is no account associated with this social security number. He began to sweat. He tried another bank. Another. The same message. His credit cards were declined. His digital wallet was empty. It was as if he had been erased from the financial system. His identity, his wealth, his credit, all of it, gone. Vanished into the silent digital void. He ran to his home safe, fumbling with the combination. He threw it open. Where stacks of cash and gold coins should have been, there was only a single piece of parchment. The same words were written upon it. The accounts are being settled. He screamed. A raw, primal sound of terror and loss. He was still screaming when Charlotte found him. She couldn't understand it. Her accounts were fine. Robert's were fine. It was only David, the architect of the betrayal. The circle was precision itself. The family was in chaos. Their greed had curdled into pure, undiluted fear. David was a wreck, babbling about ghosts and curses. Charlotte was frantically trying to access funds, to understand what had happened. Robert was just drinking, trying to numb the creeping sense of dread. Only Lily was calm. She had taken the river stone from the bank. She held it in her hand, feeling its impossible weight, its ancient smoothness. She knew. She finally understood. She went to the library, to the folio case. She didn't try to open it. She simply placed her hand on the glass and whispered, "I'm listening, Grandpa. The case remained closed, but the air around her grew warm, and for a fleeting second, she smelled my pipe tobacco, a scent that had been absent from the house for months. She knew what she had to do. She had to get to Arthur. She had to try and stop this before it consumed them all. But as she turned to leave the library, she found David blocking the doorway. His eyes were wild, desperate. Had seen her calmness, had seen the stone in her hand, and in his madness, he had decided she was the key, that she knew something he didn't. What did he tell you? David demanded, his voice a low growl. What's the secret? How do we get it back? Lily took a step back, clutching the stone. There is no secret, David. There's only what Grandpa said. We have to stop. Stop. He laughed, a broken, horrible sound. We can't stop. I have nothing. Nothing. You'll tell me what you know. He took a step toward her, his hand outstretched, not in plea, but in threat. The threat of violence. The final, unforgivable violation in a house of knowledge and peace. And as his shadow fell over my granddaughter, every light in the house went out for the final time. But this time, the darkness was different. It was alive. It was angry. And from the depths of that absolute blackness, a single sound echoed through the house. It was the sound of a great, ancient book being opened. The narrator's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. The warnings were over. The circle's patience had ended. They had chosen their path. Now they would walk it to its very end. The black water. It didn't just stain the stone floor of the cellar, it stained their souls. I could see it on them, a shadow that hadn't been there before. A mark, the circle's mark of transgression. They'd called a cleanup crew, emergency restoration service, babbling about a ruptured pipe and some strange sediment in the lines. But when the crew arrived, the water was just water, clear, cold, and perfectly normal. The inky darkness was gone without a trace, as if it had never been. The foreman gave them a look usually reserved for crazy people. Robert paid him double to forget had ever been called. That was the moment the division began in earnest. The fragile alliance between my children started to crack under the weight of the inexplicable. They were in the kitchen, the heart of the home built for my family, now a war room for their avarice. The air was thick with the smell of expensive coffee and unspoken fear. It was a trick of the light, Robert insisted, pouring a whiskey, though it was only 11 in the morning. His hand was shaking. Some kind of bacterial bloom in the pipes. It happens in old houses. He was trying so hard to cling to the rational world, the world of balance sheets and property lines, where he felt safe. Elizabeth wasn't having it. Her composure was fractured, a hairline crack spreading through her ice-cold exterior. A bacterial bloom that smells like a library, that appears and disappears in minutes. Don't be a fool, Robert. Hayes doing this. His circle is doing this. Hayes dead. Elizabeth. Robert roared, slamming his glass down on the counter. Hayes dust in a box. Hayes not doing anything. Then you explain it. She shot back, her voice rising to match his. You explain the lights. You explain the phones. You explain the water. You explain why that investigator ran out of here like he'd seen a ghost. They were shouting, their faces contorted with a fear they were transmuting into anger at each other. It was easier than facing the truth. And Kyle, my poor Kyle, was caught in the middle. Maybe we should stop, he ventured, his voice quiet, but firm. Maybe we should call Mr. Finch. Apologize. Ask him what we're supposed to do, what the rights are. The look they turned on him was pure venom. Apologize. Robert spat the word like it was poison. To that old fool. For what? For wanting what's rightfully ours. This isn't about right anymore, Robert. Carl's own anger finally flared. A desperate, protective fire. It's about something we don't understand. Can't you see that? Grandpa wasn't senile. He was part of something real. And we're poking it with a stick. It's about $200 million, Elizabeth said, her voice dropping back into that cold, calculated tone. The crack in her composure was gone, sealed over by sheer will and greed. That is the only reality that matters. Whatever this is, these parlor tricks, they are meant to scare us off. Well, I am not scared of my dead father's ghost stories, But she was. Oh, she was. I could feel her fear, a cold knot in her stomach. She was just better at hiding it than Robert. She channeled it into a colder, more dangerous resolve. The third warning was for her, personally. She decided to force the issue. She went downtown to the main branch of the bank that housed the safe deposit box mentioned in the will. The box that contained, according to the document, the physical manifest of the circle's blessing, whatever that meant. She had paperwork, hurried, a copy of the death certificate. She was going to claim it. The bank manager, a nervous man with a too-tight collar, escorted her into the vault. The box was brought to a private room. Elizabeth's hands were steady as she inserted the key I had left for her. This was it, the heart of the mystery. She would expose it, monetize it, break its power. She turned the key. The lock clicked. She opened the small, cold metal door. Inside was not a stack of bonds, nor a deed, nor a rare jewel. There was a single, ordinary-looking brown leather ledger. It was old, but not ancient. Disappointment warred with curiosity on her face. She reached in and pulled it out. As her fingers made contact with the cover, she gasped and dropped it. It fell to the table with a heavy thud. "It's freezing," she whispered to the manager, shaking her hand as if burned by the cold. The manager gave her a polite, confused smile. "The vaults are climate-controlled, Mum. It should be room temperature." He reached out and touched the ledger himself. "It's perfectly fine. See." Cautiously, she reached for it again. This time, it was normal. She opened it. The pages were blank, every single one. "Empty. I don't understand," she said, flipping through page after page of nothing. "This is a joke. A cruel, stupid joke." The manager shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps it's a symbolic gesture." Furious, Elizabeth shoved the ledger back into the box, slammed the door, unlocked it. "It's nonsense. A waste of my time." She stormed out of the bank, her heels clicking a furious tattoo on the marble floor. She got into her car, seething. She started the engine and pulled down the sun visor to check her makeup in the mirror. And she screamed. Reflected in the mirror wasn't her face. It was mine. My face, as it was in life. But my eyes were closed, and from my closed eyelids, black, inky tears were streaming down my cheeks. She slammed the visor back up, her heart hammering against her ribs. She fumbled for her phone to call Robert, to tell him, to finally admit that something was terribly wrong. But when she pulled up his contact and put the phone to her ear, the voice that answered wasn't Robert's. It was mine. It was my voice, but stripped of all warmth, all life, a dry, rustling whisper, like pages turning in a tomb. "The ledger is not for you, Elizabeth. The accounts are being settled." She threw the phone across the car as if it were a venomous snake. She sat there, in the bank's parking garage, trembling uncontrollably, finally and utterly terrified. She told no one, not Robert, not Kyle. To admit what she had seen and heard would be to admit her own sanity was crumbling. So, she buried it. She let the fear fester inside her, and it made her even more ruthless. They redoubled their efforts. They hired a new man, not an investigator, but a security consultant named Draper, a man with a military bearing and eyes that held no emotion at all. His job was not to find the circle, but to persuade Arthur Finch, to make him see the financial sense in complying. They were moving from bribery to coercion. I felt a cold fury wash over me. They were going after my oldest friend, the one man who had stayed true. Draper went to Arthur's office late one evening. Arthur was working alone. I was there, in the portrait, my painted eyes watching. Draper was smooth, polite, but the threat was implicit in his posture, in his cold, flat tone. He talked about Arthur's aged wife, about his granddaughter away at college. He talked about accidents, about unfortunate events. Arthur Finch, my gentle, bookish friend, listened patiently, and when Draper was finished, Arthur did something astonishing. He smiled, a small, sad smile. "Son," he said, his voice quiet, but filled with an authority that made Draper, for the first time, blink. "You have no idea what you are involved in. You are a hired thug sent by children to threaten a keeper. Your employers are already damned. Leave now, and perhaps you can avoid sharing their fate. Draper's face tightened. He wasn't used to being dismissed. He took a step forward, a clear intimidation tactic, and all the lights in the office went out. The door locked itself with a loud, definitive thunk. From the darkness, a voice spoke. It wasn't Arthur's. It was a chorus of whispers, layered over one another, emanating from the corners of the room, from the bookshelves themselves. It was the silent word, given voice. The circle sees you. Draper, a man who had faced combat in 3 war zones, stumbled backward, his breath catching in his throat. He fumbled for the door handle, yanking at it frantically. The lights came back on. The door was unlocked. Arthur was still sitting at his desk, his hands folded, as if nothing had happened. The offer is withdrawn, Draper stammered, his professional demeanor utterly shattered. He fled the office and called Robert from his car, his voice shaking. The job is off. Don't call me again. And for God's sake, leave that old man alone. When Robert told Elizabeth, her face went ashen. Their last option, the option of force, had just been taken off the table by something they couldn't fight. They were trapped. The consequences were no longer just warnings. They began to become real. Robert's business, a lucrative import-export firm that I had helped him start, began to hemorrhage money. Not through bad deals or market forces. The money just vanished. Invoices were paid from accounts that didn't exist. Shipments were misrouted to locations that didn't exist. His credit lines were frozen by institutions that had no record of the freeze. His financial reality was unraveling. Elizabeth's world began to contract. Her friends, her social contacts, started to forget her. Calls went unanswered. Invitations stopped. She'd show up at a charity gala, and people would look right through her, as if she weren't there. She was becoming a ghost in her own life, erased from the social ledger. And Carl's punishment was the cruelest of all. He was the one who tried to stop it. He was the one who saw. But the code does not discriminate. The transgression was familial. The consequence was shared. He fell ill. A sudden, debilitating fever that no doctor could diagnose. He was plagued by nightmares, visions of a great, silent library filled with books whose pages were blank, and of a hooded figure pointing an accusing finger at him. He was wasting away, trapped in the house of his inheritance, which had become a gilded prison. They were being dismantled, piece by piece, their wealth, their connections, their health. The circle was not attacking them with monsters or ghosts. It was simply withdrawing the world from them. It was making them irrelevant. It was settling the accounts, just as my voice had promised Elizabeth. One night, at the absolute end of their rope, they finally broke. They were in the library again. Robert was drunk. Elizabeth was hollow-eyed, staring into the fire. Carl was shivering under a blanket on the sofa, pale and sweating. "We have to go to Arthur," Elizabeth said, her voice empty of everything but exhaustion. "We have to beg." Robert laughed, a broken, ugly sound. "Beg? For what?" "For him to tell us the secret handshake. To perform a ritual. It's over, Liz. Can't you see? We lost. The old man beat us. He's beating us from the grave." It was then that Carl spoke, his voice weak from fever, but clear with a hard-won understanding. "It was never about beating us," he whispered. "It was about proving us. Proving we were worthy. The foundation," he didn't mean the house. He struggled to sit up, his eyes bright with a terrible clarity. "The foundation is the truth. The truth he wanted us to see. That it was never about the money. It was about the secret. The knowledge the circle guards. The inheritance wasn't the fortune, the inheritance was the circle. The silence that followed was the first moment of true understanding they had ever had. And it was too late. As the words left Carl's lips, the fire in the hearth didn't just die down. It inverted. The flames didn't go up, they sucked down into the grate, followed by a roar of air. And then a blast of freezing cold erupted from the fireplace, extinguishing the last embers and filling the room with the scent of frost and old stone. And from the cold, dark hearth, a single sheet of parchment floated out, as if carried on an unseen wind. It drifted across the room and landed at Elizabeth's feet. On it, In the same luminous ink Kyle had seen in the book was a message. The code is broken. The silence is broken. The Pitt legacy is forfeit. The assets revert to the circle. You are granted the mercy of memory. You will remember what you had, and what you lost, and why. It was over. They had lost everything, not just the money, but their place in the world. They were exiles. The next morning, the house was no longer theirs. The deed, all the accounts, everything, it was gone from their names, transferred to a trust they could not touch. Arthur Finch arrived with movers to pack my personal effects for the Circle's archives. He looked at my 3 broken children with profound pity, but offered no comfort. The code had spoken. Robert's business declared bankruptcy within the week. Elizabeth became a recluse, a phantom in a small apartment, cut off from the society she loved. Kyle eventually recovered his health, but he was changed, quieter, older. They had their memories. They remembered the fortune, the status, the power that had been within their grasp, and they remembered how their greed had cost them everything. I should feel vindicated. I should feel that justice was served. But as I watch them, from wherever I am, I feel only an immense, sorrowful emptiness. I wanted to protect them. I wanted to give them a legacy worth more than gold. And in the end, all I gave them was a curse. They broke the code of silence. And the silence is forever. The darkness that fell wasn't an absence of light. It was a presence. A living, breathing entity of pure shadow that poured into the library, swallowing the room whole. It had weight. It had intention. And it was furious. I felt it. A surge of power from the circle so potent it vibrated through the very foundations of the house. The warnings were over. The transgression was complete. David had raised his hand in violence within the sanctum, against a child of the blood. The code was not just broken, it had been shattered. In that absolute blackness, I heard David's sharp intake of breath, a gasp of pure, animal terror. I heard Lily whimper, not in pain, but in awe. And I heard the book, the first folio, in the glass case. It wasn't just glowing now, it was blazing with a cold, silver fire that did not illuminate the room, but instead seemed to deepen the shadows around it. The lock didn't click, it dissolved. The glass door did not open, it ceased to be, and the book rose. It floated, suspended in the air, pages rustling though there was no wind. It was beautiful and terrifying, a thing of pure power. David stumbled backward, crashing into a reading chair. "What is this?" he screamed, his voice high-pitched and ragged. "Lily, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything," Lily cried, but her voice was lost in the gathering storm of silence. The shadows in the room began to coalesce. They pulled away from the walls, drawing together into distinct forms. Not monsters, not ghosts, something far older. They were humanoid shapes, tall and slender, woven from darkness and the faint, silver light of knowledge. They were the silent word given form, the keepers of the circle, past and present, answering the violation. They had no faces, only a sense of immense, ancient regard. They stood in a semicircle around David, who was now cowering on the floor, shielding his eyes. One of the figures glided forward. It did not walk. It moved like a thought. It stopped before David and extended a hand of shimmering shadow. It did not touch him. It pointed at the safe deposit box key, which had fallen from his pocket and lay on the rug. The key began to melt, not from heat. It simply unraveled, dissolving into a fine, metallic dust that was absorbed into the Persian rug until nothing remained. The figure then pointed at David's head. David did not scream. He made a sound I have never heard a human make before, a hollow, desolate gurgle of pure loss. It was the sound of a mind being scoured. The shadow figure turned its faceless gaze to the rest of the house. It was looking for the others. Upstairs, Charlotte was frantically trying to pack a suitcase. The sudden darkness and the unnatural silence had finally broken her. The cold, calculating executive was gone, replaced by a terrified animal caught in a trap. She was throwing jewels, cash, passports into a bag, her hands shaking so badly she could barely work the zipper. The door to her bedroom blew open, not from wind, from force. The shadow figure stood there, framed in the doorway, the silver light from the library casting its long, impossible silhouette down the hall. Charlotte froze, a diamond necklace slipping from her fingers. She stared, her mouth agape, at the thing in her doorway. It was the embodiment of every secret Shed ever tried to bury, every truth Shed ever ignored. It was her father's legacy, and it had come for her. It glided into the room. It pointed at her suitcase. The bag didn't vanish. The contents did. The jewels, the money, the passports all gone, leaving behind empty silk linings. It was erasing her escape. Then it pointed at her mouth. Charlotte tried to speak, to beg, to promise anything, but no sound came out. Her voice was gone. Not hoarse, not taken, gone, as if it had never existed. She clutched at her throat, her eyes wide with a terror, so profound it was almost peaceful. The instrument of her manipulation, her sharpest weapon, had been permanently sheathed. The figure turned and left her there, in the silent, dark room, a prisoner in her own mind. Robert was in the wine cellar, had broken the lock on the gate decades ago as a teenager, and had gone down there to hide, to drink himself into oblivion with a bottle of my 1945 Chateau Mouton Rothschild. He heard the commotion upstairs, the screams that were suddenly cut short, and he huddled deeper into the corner, clutching the bottle like a talisman. The shadows down there were already deep, but they deepened further. The single bare bulb overhead didn't just go out, it was extinguished, and the darkness that replaced it was thicker than the air. The shadow figure emerged from the wall itself, its form drinking the faint light from the silver glow seeping under the cellar door. It saw Robert. It saw the bottle in his hand. It pointed. The bottle didn't break. The wine inside it turned black, then clear, then evaporated into a faint, sour mist. Every other bottle in the cellar, hundreds of them, my priceless collection, underwent the same transformation. The air grew thick with the ghost of spoiled vinegar. Then the figure pointed at Robert's hands. He cried out as a searing cold, not heat, spread through his fingers. He looked down. His hands were shaking violently. A fine, black dust seemed to be settling on them, leaching into his skin. He felt a strange numbness spread up his arms. He was a surgeon. His hands were his life, his pride, his identity, and he could feel the skill, the knowledge, the very memory of how to use them, draining away. The circle wasn't crippling him. It was taking his purpose. The figure left him there, weeping over useless, empty hands. The consequences were not general. They were exquisitely, personally tailored. The circle knew their sins better than they knew themselves. Down in the library, the main shadow figure, the one that had dealt with David, now turned its attention to Lily. She was still on the floor, holding the river stone, her face pale but her eyes clear. She was terrified, but she wasn't broken. The figure loomed over her. It did not point. It simply regarded her. Lily, brave, wonderful Lily, looked up into that faceless void and spoke, her voice small but steady. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "We shouldn't have done it. We should have listened." The figure tilted its head. It slowly reached down a hand of shifting darkness. It did not touch her. It touched the river stone in her palm. The stone began to glow with a soft, warm, golden light, a light that pushed back the oppressive darkness, creating a small circle of safety around her. The light flowed from the stone, up her arm, and seemed to settle around her like a cloak. The figure straightened up and gestured toward the door. The message was clear. Go. Lily scrambled to her feet, clutching the glowing stone. She didn't run. She walked, the light moving with her. A lone star in a universe of black. She passed David, who was now rocking back and forth on the floor, muttering numbers and equations that made no sense, the scattered fragments of his financial mind. She didn't look back. She went upstairs. She saw her mother, Charlotte, sitting on the bed, silently weeping, making frantic, useless gestures with her hands. She saw Robert coming up from the cellar, staring at his hands as if they belonged to a stranger. The shadow figures were gone. The darkness receded, but it did not lift entirely. A permanent twilight had fallen over the house. The electricity was back, but the lights were dim, jaundiced, unable to push back the new, profound gloom that had taken root. The physical attack was over. The spiritual and psychological siege was just beginning. The next morning, the world had changed for them. The circle's justice was comprehensive. David's financial erasure was total. His name was on no deeds, no accounts, no records. He was a financial non-person. When he tried to get a job, his credentials were gone. His university had no record of his degree. His former employers had no record of his employment. He was a ghost, and a broke one at that. He spent his days wandering the house, trying to piece together fragments of business plans that led nowhere. His mind a ruined library, with all the important books missing. Charlotte's social erasure was equally absolute. Her friends didn't just ignore her, they genuinely seemed to have no memory of her. She'd stand in front of them, and they'd look right through her. She tried to write notes, to communicate, but her hands would shake so badly the words were illegible scrawls. The woman who had lived by her voice and her social connections was now a mute phantom, a world that could not see her. Robert's professional death was complete. The state medical board had no record of his license. The hospital, where he was chief of surgery, had no record of his employment. His hands, once the steadiest in the state, now trembled constantly. He couldn't hold a scalpel. He couldn't even hold a teacup without spilling it. He took to wearing gloves, hiding the physical manifestation of his shame. The house itself was no longer a home. It was a gilded cage, a museum of their failure. The electricity worked, but only barely. The water ran, but it was often ice cold or scalding hot without warning. Phones would only call each other within the house. The internet was gone. They were isolated, cut off from the world, trapped together with the consequences of their shared greed. And I was forced to watch. This was my legacy, not the money, not the property. This, a family broken, not by poverty, but by the weight of a truth they were too small to carry. Weeks passed. The silence in the house was broken only by David's mad muttering, Charlotte's silent sobs, and the sound of Robert breaking another glass his hands could not hold. Then a letter arrived. It was slipped under the front door. There was no postmark, no stamp. The paper was thick parchment. The seal was the sigil of the circle. It was addressed to Lily. She found it and brought it into the library, the only room that still held a semblance of its old warmth, thanks to the gentle glow of her river stone. The others gathered around, their eyes hollow, desperate for any communication from the outside world. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and read aloud. The voice that came out was mine. I had dictated this letter to Arthur the week before I died, for exactly this moment. My dearest Lily, and to my children who I hope are listening, if you are hearing this, the code has been broken, and the circle has passed its judgment. You have felt its weight. I take no pleasure in your suffering. I feel only a sorrow so deep it has followed me into the afterlife. You were never meant to inherit wealth. You were meant to inherit a purpose. The circle is not a treasure to be spent. It is a duty to be born. It is the guardian of forgotten histories, lost knowledge, and truths that would unravel the world if they were known. The money was merely the tool to facilitate that guardianship. You saw a lock and tried to pick it. You were supposed to ask for the key. The key was always respect. It was trust. It was humility. There is no reversing what has been done. The circle's judgment is eternal. But there is a path forward, not to regain what was lost, but to build something new from the ruins. The estate is gone. The trust has been dissolved. The assets have returned to the circle. But this house is still yours. It is your prison, or it can become your sanctuary. It can be the place you wither, or the place you begin to understand. The choice is yours. The circle will not interfere again. You are beneath its notice now. Lily, you alone showed a willing heart. The stone you hold is more than a rock. It is a promise, a seed. What you choose to grow with it is up to you. I loved you all. I love you still. That is the one truth not even the circle can erase. Goodbye. Silence. The kind of silence that comes after a storm has passed, leaving only devastation in its wake. David was the first to move. He let out a choked sob and stumbled from the room. The truth in the letter was a final hammer blow to his shattered mind. He would spend the rest of his days a ghost in the halls, a living testament to the cost of greed. Charlotte looked at her hands, then at Lily. For the first time, there was no calculation in her eyes, only a bleak, empty regret. She reached out and touched her daughter's cheek, a silent tear tracing a path through the dust on her face. Then she, too, left, walking slowly upstairs to her silent room. Robert looked at his own useless hands. He looked at the empty glass that had held his wine. He looked at Lily, and for a flickering second, I saw the man he could have been, the healer, not the taker. He didn't speak. He just nodded, a slow, painful gesture of acceptance, and walked away, his shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. Lily was left alone in the library. She held the letter in one hand, and the glowing stone in the other. She was crying, but they were not tears of despair. They were tears of release, of understanding. She walked to the empty first folio case. She placed the river stone inside, on the velvet stand, where the book had once rested. It glowed, a steady, warm beacon in the gloom of the house. She had inherited nothing, and she had inherited everything. The circle's work was done. Justice, in its own ruthless, ancient way, had been served. The code of silence had been violated, and the silence had, indeed, broken them. But in that breaking, in the utter devastation of all they had desired, there was a sliver of something else, something that felt, to my watching spirit, like a beginning. The fortress had fallen. The treasures were gone, but the foundation remained. And on that foundation, one last, small light was left burning.